Welcome back to the ThriveIN Wabash County, where we highlight the people and individuals and events that are happening in our community that make this a wonderful place to live and work and thrive. Today's episode, I have a special guest with Acres Land Trust, Jason Kissel, the executive director. He's joining me in the studio. We're going to talk about all of the properties that Acres manages in Northeast Indiana, Southern Michigan, and even Northwest Ohio, if I have that right.
That's correct.
Welcome to the studio, Jason.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
For our listeners that maybe aren't familiar with Acres or they're not sure exactly how you guys got founded and what the mission is, give us a little backstory in what Acres actually does.
Sure. So we're a land trust, and that doesn't help a lot of people because it's not a common organization. And land trusts can do different things, but what Acres really focuses in on is looking for really unique natural areas, those areas that communities say, this is something different in our community. It's kind of part of who we are. And then we acquire those properties, and then we guarantee to hold them forever. And that's a big commitment. And so we're pretty picky on the lands that we acquire. But once we obtain them, we manage them for nature. And so we'll manage them for the forest or the wetlands or the grasslands that they are. We also do some family farms, keeping them in agriculture. And then many of them we open up to the public. And so we'll have hiking trails and ways for people to enjoy these natural areas that are really close to them, kind of in their backyards. But Acres was the first group in Indiana who decided, let's try this thing. Mm-hmm. And so in 1960, there was a group of people, mainly from the Fort Wayne area, who got together, sat around on a couch, kind of like we're doing here, and saying, you know, there's still a lot of really cool land in Indiana that's worthy of protection, but the Hoosier National Forest is already set up. Most of the state parks are already set up, and there's not a lot of people that are still acquiring new natural areas. And so they said, you know, this has worked on the East Coast and the West Coast. Let's see if Hoosiers will support this. And so they all pitched in $5 and said, let's try it. And 65 years later, we're still growing strong and still have a lot of that grassroots of, hey, let's see if there's people who really want to see more natural areas preserved. And so 65 years later, we've acquired 8,500 acres of land. And that grows. That number's actually out of date because we closed on some properties last week. We're going to close on another property next week, and then one more by the end of the year. So this isn't something that was done in the past. It's something that's currently happening too.
That's really cool. So in 1960, you said Acres was founded. But if I remember right, there was like a Land Preservation Act that didn't even exist at that point. Is that right?
Correct. So in 1960, these group of 12 people said, we're going to preserve land and we're going to preserve it forever. And we got $60 in the bank. So it's like, well, how do we do that? Because no one had done that. And so one of those founding members was Jim Barrett, the Barretts of the Barrett McNagny law firm in Fort Wayne. And so he's like, you know what? We're going to be an organization that's a private property owner. How can we add protection? How can we add some forever protection? And so he authored the Nature Preserve Act of Indiana, and then Tom and Jane Dustin really kind of helped lobby that. They got it passed through the legislature, and the brilliant thing about it is it says that the state of Indiana designates these areas called state-dedicated nature preserves. And the line that's really important is it says, the state of Indiana declares that now and forever, the highest and best use of this property is as a nature preserve. And so what that does is it prevents the state, the county, the city from taking it through eminent domain, because eminent domain means that there's a higher and better use. But the state has said, no, there's not any higher and better use of this particular property than the really cool natural features that are here. So it doesn't prevent things from being taken from the federal government, but it protects it from the state on down. And so that's one big thing that Acres did early on to help protect land for a really long time. And when we say forever, I put asterisks around it because I'm also a pastor. And so forever is a really, really long time. And so when we say that, what we're trying to do is do everything we can as an organization. But there's things out of our control. We need there to be private property law, and that's one thing we can't control. But for 250 years, we've had that, and hopefully we'll still have that system for quite a while. And so when we say forever, we try to add protections to the property like the Nature Preserve Act. We make sure that our finances can support forever. And so one thing we do there with our finances is our endowment is always growing to the point where if no one gave another dollar to acres ever again, we'd have enough to scale back to one employee. That employee would pay all of our drainage assessments and liability insurance and do everything necessary to own the property that we have.
So that was a question I was going to have was, what are the responsibilities of acres as far financially? Do you pay taxes and you said drainage rights? How does that work? Are you exempt from those or not?
Yeah, we're typically exempt from property taxes, just like any other nonprofit who owns land. But we do pay property taxes on like ag that we're, or land that we're actively cash renting out, or things like that. So if we're having income producing from our properties, even though we could file for an exemption, we don't on those properties. But for the most of our properties that are nature preserves, yes, we don't have to pay property tax.
So, and how do you actually acquire property? I'm assuming there's multiple ways, but could you go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So there's really three ways, and it's kind of based on the price of the property. And so sometimes land is completely donated. Sometimes land we pay full price for because we're going to auction or it's on the market. But the vast majority, I would say 20 to 25% are full donations and 20 to 25% are full market value sales. The rest, the 50%, is a bargain sale. So in a bargain sale, someone realizes the value of what acres is going to give to their land. Mm-hmm. So they may have owned this land for a long time or just have a deep connection to it. And they're like, I would love for acres to own this because I know that I can come back in 20 years and they'll still own it and it won't be developed and it'll be still in its natural state. And so they'll discount it. So it makes it easier for acres to acquire it. And so that's how we obtain most properties. And again, there's a lot of land that people are very generous and want to donate to us, but we can't accept because it's a big commitment. Even if you accept a property that's worth $1 million now, that's a hugely generous gift. But we're going to spend much more than that over the course of the next 300, 500 years as we manage those properties. And so again, like I said at the outset, we have to be pretty picky on the properties that we acquire because we're given that guarantee of forever. And that's a lot of effort. That's a lot of money. And it's just a lot of organizational will that goes into these properties.
And so what's that criteria? If somebody wanted to give outright their land, what are you looking for?
Yeah. We're looking for, again, those natural areas that are unique. What is it about this property that's worthy of it being protected, not just now, but for a very, very long time? And so our highest priorities are properties that grow our existing properties larger or those of our partners. So if it's an in-holding in a state forest or a state park, the DNR often asks us to come in and try to acquire those. And so those are high priority for us. We have areas that we just have on our target list since the 1960s. Like these are some of the great areas of Northeast Indiana and Michigan and Ohio that we need to obtain at some point. And sometimes it takes decades to obtain them. And so we've been talking to those owners. And so those are very high priority for us. Anytime that we can find intact natural systems that are large, 300 acres or larger, that's a big priority for us. Those are becoming harder and harder to find. You used to be able to find a landowner that had a 1,000-acre forest. That's really unusual now. And so it's often 100 acres. And so, but if it's a 100-acre island, we're much less excited about that than 100 acres next to 1,000 acres of forest that we may be able to grow. Again, it may take us 60 years again to do that, but there's potential to grow that. So we look at riparian areas, which are the areas around the river systems, which Wabash is really blessed with. And so that's how we really look at it. And when you look at that big of a service area, we work in 27 counties, you have to really prioritize where is it of all those areas that we could acquire. And obviously we can't acquire everything that we want to. So it has to be the highest of the high priorities for us to be able to spend that money on it.
Yeah. So you mentioned the DNR and like the state, you work in conjunction with them on some projects as well. So not in a competitive way, but really complementary.
It really is. Yeah. They do stuff that we can't do and we can do stuff that they can't do. And so, you know, the stuff that we can do that they can't do as well is be nimble. And so we just bought a property at the beginning of this year up in Elkhart County that was the seller needed to sell it now. And it was one of those properties that we've been having a relationship with since the 80s. And so it's just now the timing is right. The family had a financial need, and DNR really wants to be the ultimate owner. They own the property next door. One of these great properties, again, just full of federally endangered species, some Massasauga rattlesnakes, and just some really cool boggy areas that you just don't find. And so we were able to rally the troops and acquire that property. And then the DNR is going to pay us back for that once they get approval. Again, it's already been a year or probably another year out. And even though it's a high priority for them, they can't get approval that quickly. So often when properties are going to auction, we'll jump in and do that. And then the DNR will turn around and refund us that money.
And when I think of what Acres is doing and compare it to a state park or state forest, is that sometimes your preserves, they're not open to the public. Sometimes they are, and they've got some beautiful trails. I would say that they're low maintained. I don't know if there's a better way to put that, but you leave it very natural. Whereas a state park may have some more manicured trails, compliant with ADA and that sort of things. And state parks, I think, are more for recreation, and that's not what Acres is for.
Correct. Yeah, so our mission is preserving those natural areas. And so, we don't have a recreational mission, but we've recognized that for people to really experience and get excited about what we do, there's nothing better than for have them be able to walk through some of these examples.
Yeah.
And so here in Wabash County, if you go to the Hathaway Preserve or Kokowani, and you're just like, I didn't know these things existed in Northeast Indiana. And you get excited that somebody protected it. And so that's why our trails exist is, yes, they're for recreation, but the main purpose is to help people remember that they enjoy the natural area, that, I'm really glad that there's people who support this kind of work here where I live. And it's meant to be you and nature. And so they're earthen trails. We try to not to put too many like directional signs or interpretive signs within the preserves because we don't want to tell you what to pay attention to because nature will do that.
Yeah.
It just it's your opportunity to be there in nature and utilize it in a way that's most appropriate for you.
A few years back, Visit Wabash County had reached out to Acres. They did a waterfall tour right here in the county. I think we highlighted maybe 4 or 5 waterfalls, and I was part of that lead on that. And we went to Hathaway, and the number of people that even possibly lived here their entire lives had no idea that existed.
Yeah.
Just a few miles outside of town.
Yep.
It's a beautiful property. It's a small property. It's not large. It's not like going to Turkey Run State Park. You're going to go and you may spend an hour there and you're going to cover all the trails.
Yep.
But it's absolutely beautiful, and it changes every season. You're going to find something else out there. You got the waterfall. In the winter, it's beautiful when it freezes over, but in the spring, it may be really flowing. That property is just a gem, and it's within a few minute drive of downtown Wabash.
Yep. Yeah, and that's one of those where I've been with Acres for 19 years, and that was the first property that I went to that I controlled the acquisition from the start to finish. And that one was coming up for auction, and our geologist pointed that out to us. We don't have a geologist on staff, but all these ologists in the area love what Acres does. And so they really kind of keep an eye out for us. We have them come in, and again, I call it the convergence of the ologist, where we have a property, and I'm trained in forestry, and so I know trees pretty well. And the other stuff, I can recognize when something's unique. I'm like, there's a really cool sedge meadow over there, but all I know about sedges compared to grass is they have edges. Sedges have edges. But we know that there's sedge experts in our area, and so we'll call them in. And so Tony Fleming, the geologist, came in, and David Hicks from Manchester University came in as a botanist, and they're both like, you've got to acquire this. This is something really unique from a geological standpoint and from the plant life. And so that was one of those where we went to auction, had no idea how we were going to fundraise for it, but we knew we needed to own it. And so we outbid whoever was there on the main part of the property, and we acquired it that way. And then we had to backfill with fundraising. And so we reached out to the community and said, there's something really spectacular here that the community doesn't even know about a whole lot. And the community responded. And so as local individuals, we brought in some money from the state for it because, again, it's got this statewide significance. And because we pick areas that are so unique, it's pretty obvious to people when we show them pictures or take them hiking. They're like, oh, I see why you want this. This isn't just your typical forest. This isn't your typical stream. And it's got a geological timeline to it. And it's got all this history. And it's got these rare plants that can only occur on cliff faces, and only if those cliff faces are facing south. And lo and behold, you got some of those here. And there's these little tiny things that look like everything else, but they may be the only example in Indiana. Those are the type of properties that Acres looks for. And then we acquire and then share them with the community in some way. Like you said, some of them are even closed to the public, but we can still share them with the public and say, look at this property. You can't go there unless we have a special event there, but it's here. It's serving this purpose for this particular area. And there's some things there that you can't find anywhere else. And in order for them to stay there, sometimes we have to protect it so much that we don't have people in it all the time.
Yeah. And we should say that the Acres properties that are open to the public, like Hathaway, there's no charge. There's no gate entry fee. Yep. You can go out there for an hour or two if you want. But you do have some, I would say, fairly strict rules that a lot of people that aren't familiar with being in nature preserves may not be aware of. Go over some of those that, I mean, they're kind of common sense for me. I've
Sure.
spent some time out there, but for people that haven't been out there. And I'd also like to say that during COVID, one of the things that I thought was really cool was that more people got out in nature. For me, I had spent a lot of time out at Kokawani or at Hathaway, and most of the time I was out there prior to COVID, I'd be the only person there.
Yep.
And it was my little sanctuary.
Yep.
So it was this push-pull for me of like, wow, people are getting out and they're experiencing the same thing I am, but I've also lost my special place.
Yep.
But one of the things I noticed that not everyone knew the rules when you go into nature like that. So go over some of those expectations.
Is different. And like you said, we offer them free to the public, dawn to dusk, every day for free. And that's because there's people who support Acres and allow that to happen. And so the people who support Acres love land, but they love people too. And so we don't want to just preserve land for land's sake. We want to protect it for all, and all includes us. And so they make possible these preserves being acquired and then being open to the public. But yes, they are special places, and so we have some special rules. But it's pretty routine. Again, it's non-consumptive use. You can bring your dog. We just ask that you keep them on a leash. The main thing is we ask people to stay on the trail. And that's sometimes hard because you see this really cool thing that's off trail and you want to go there. And again, the reason is we're not trying to keep you from having fun. We're trying to make sure that you are being able to witness how this place is special. And so mushroom hunting is a good example. We don't allow mushroom hunting. It's not that we care about the mushrooms all that much. However, during mushroom season is when many of these vascular plants are flowering. And so what we're really trying to protect is not the morel mushrooms, because they're fairly common, even though they can be hard to find. But you may be going after that mushroom that's 20 feet or 20 yards off the trail, and unbeknownst to you, you're stomping through some of the plants that we got really excited and acquired this property for. That literally may be one of 5 examples in the whole state of Indiana. And we've got scientists and ologists from around the state and from around the Midwest really excited about that one population. And you would never stomp through that if you knew that. Mm-hmm. But that's why we ask people to stay on the trails, is because these places are special. They aren't the typical natural areas that you're used to going to in somebody's back 40. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we ask people to really respect the property in that way, because a lot of times you don't know what you may be harming by going off a trail.
The other one is packing in and packing out your own trash.
Yep.
I don't know that I ever remember seeing a trash can at any of your places. And that's because you don't want people to leave trash there. Yep. You want them to take it home and dispose of it once they get there.
Yeah. And we've had really good luck with that. It's really nice. I used to work for Indianapolis Park System, and we spent so much money picking up people's trash. And we don't have that same issue with the nature preserves very often. There'll be some in the parking lots for people who are just there eating lunch and, they're really not there for nature. But the people who go out of their way to travel to a nature preserve are doing it because they have some core value that they add to nature. And so those aren't people who are going to be throwing away their plastic bottle as they're done with it. And so they'll crumple it up and throw it in their pocket. A lot of people that are walking to nature preserves will bring a Walmart bag with them and pick up other people's trash. And so that's been really nice to see, is that a lot of people understand that, wow, this is a big property that is private property, but they're making it available to me. And so a lot of people are really respectful of our rules. And again, COVID was great because it reminded all of us that we do have this connection to nature, and a lot of us had lost it. And so it really got a lot of new people exposed to not just to acres, but to outdoors again. And yeah, it's an etiquette that has to be learned. Yep. Because if you're not used to doing that, you're like, oh, wait a minute, this is different than a park, or it's different than something that's just for recreation. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was great and it's good. And again, I'm just so impressed with the respect that most visitors do have.
One of the properties that you have, I would refer to it as the old Girl Scout camp. I think it's technically the Kokowani. Could you go into a little bit about how that property was acquired?
Yeah, again, it's another example of the community saying, this is a natural feature that we are really connected to, and we don't want it to go away. And so sometimes acres can play that role. So this was before my time with acres, but my understanding was the Girl Scouts weren't using it anymore as a camp, and so they were just going to sell it on the open market. And a lot of the Girl Scouts who had gone there, and the community around here and around Kokomo, who had great memories at this place, said, hey, why don't we see if we could convince the Girl Scouts to sell it to Acres or the DNR, or somebody who's going to hold it. That way we can always go back there instead of it turning into 4 or 5 homes. And so they really rallied around, and they got a hold of Acres, and Acres looked at it and says, yeah, that is really interesting. There's all these waterfalls and great natural features and this great ravine, and it's right next to the Salamone River and right next to the core property and right across the street from the Salamone State. So it met all of our criteria also. Mm-hmm. And so we rallied around the community and said, all right, we're going to put our money where our mouth is. And so we ended up, again, one of those things where like, that's an expensive project, but we believe in the property enough to know that the community loves the property already, and it's got a lot of natural features. People will rally behind this, and they did. And so Acres was able to acquire it, and now it's still available for the people who knew it as a scout camp in the 40s and the 60s and the 80s. They can come back and still experience that property.
Yeah. It's a beautiful property. I spent a lot of time out on that property. You can get right down essentially to the boat ramp area. So for people that are listening and they're not able to picture where we're talking about, I'm going to put a link to your website in our show notes. And your website's really nice. It talks about how to donate, what properties you can find by county, the different properties, not just in Wabash County, but Allen County and Miami County. The whole map's on there. So I'll make sure I have a link on there. But that is one spectacular piece of property. This is probably like asking you to choose your favorite child, but is there a piece of property that really means something special to you? Maybe it's Hathaway because it was the first one you helped acquire, or some other feature maybe somewhere else.
Yeah, each one is really special. At the age of 5, I declared to my dad that I'm going to spend my life caring for trees. And so trees are my draw into nature. I love lots of other things in that, but that's my thing that drew me in. And so for me, the preserves with the really old trees on them really just speak to me. When you can, go up to trees that have been in place for 250 years, there's just something really special about that. And so for me, it's the properties that have that. And with the mission of Acres, what I love is all the properties are going to have that in a mere 200 years, even if there's only 50 years worth of growth now. And I really value long-term thinking too. Again, that's what drew me to ministry. That's what drew me to forestry. Forestry is a crop that you grow for 80 years, And then when you look at a nature preserve management, we're really looking in decades and centuries. And we can say things like a mere 200 years. We have a short-term project in one of our properties that's 200 years long. And so we're going to study this property we commission an artist each year and a scientist each year to look at one aspect of this property. And we're going to do that for just 200 years and show what has changed in that property in that short amount of time, because that's such a short amount of time in the natural history. You think just 200 years back, and we still would have had some of the bison running through and the elk and the black bear. Our forest would have been dominated by chestnuts and elms, and it would have been a completely different place just 200 years ago. And so when you manage properties that way, I start to be able to see some of that on the properties where you have 200 years worth of growth and 250 years worth of growth, and to know that this tree was here before Indiana was a state. And so to me, those are the properties that excite me. And we have a few examples of that, individual trees here in Wabash County, like even at Hathaway that we mentioned before, there's a few really large examples of some old black oaks and red oaks that are pushing at least 200 to 225 years. And in Noble County, there's a property called Spurgeon Nature Preserve, and it's got a really nice old growth forest where you're seeing what a community of trees look like with 200 years of growth on them.
So much of Indiana was affected during the Ice Age, affected our geography. Is there any particular property where we can see something really spectacular from that period?
Yeah, Hanging Rock is a good example. When we've led like hikes up to the top of Hanging Rock, it's normally off limits, but occasionally, we'll guide people to the top. And if you've ever been on the top of Hanging Rock, you realize that you're sitting above a lot. You can see down the Wabash River in both directions, and you're on this little perch, and everything else is lower. But if you look north past LaGros and you see that big hill that if you take LaGros Road up and you go to 24, you're like, oh, there's a big hill there. And then you turn around to the south and you start to look towards the Narrows and you're looking at the state forest, you're like, oh, there's another ridge. And then you realize that, wow, you're right in the middle of what was the Maumee Torrent. So back before the Wabash River was a river, all that area was completely flat. And you would have been standing on top of Hanging Rock, which would have been a little bit underneath the ground, and it all would have been a flat area. But the water, as the glacier was starting to move towards what is now Lake Erie, once it got into Ohio, it stopped there for a while and created this huge lake behind it, glacial Lake Erie, which was 3 times the size of the current Lake Erie. All of a sudden, that thing broke. The dam broke, and ice broke. And all that water came gushing through. And so it started near Fort Wayne and just came roaring down. And so the Wabash River was formed in a matter of days instead of centuries and millennium. And so all that water had to find somewhere to go. And so it scoured out all this area. And so now when you stand on top of Hanging Rock, you can see where the banks of the Wabash River was during that 10-day time period. You're like, wow, that scoured out everything. And you go down to Rich Valley and you say the same thing. You're in the middle of this valley and you're looking around like, wow, the bank's way over there. And then 2 miles behind me is the other bank. And so Wabash is a great geological place because it tells that story. And, if you're coming down 24 and you're coming from Huntington and you're coming just at the county line into Wabash, you go up that big hill. Mm-hmm. And that was where the glacier stopped for a long time and was just depositing and depositing and depositing. And so all the hills around here have that story, and most of them are 13,000-year-old stories. And then Hanging Rock has got even a story much further behind it, because the reason that Hanging Rock is still there, like this little rock that didn't get washed away when everything else around it did, is because it's a fossilized reef from when Wabash County was a shallow sea. And so at Hathaway Preserve and at Hanging Rock, you see sea sponge and nautilus fossils, and anything that you would see in a Caribbean reef, you can see there fossilized. And so Wabash County is so rich in natural history, and it's obvious. It's not buried 300 feet down. It's right in your face. And so that's what Acres likes to do with our programming, is remind people that they live in a natural world and that the town of Wabash is here because the natural features were here. And then when you can tell people about the hill that they travel, oh, I never knew. I never even thought about the hill. And so, again, we look for those really unique natural features. And often the community has already identified those. And so the Miami Nation has identified a lot of these long before we did too. And so Hanging Rock has always been a sacred place, and Seven Pillars that we own now and working beside the Miami Nation there. These are all places that all people have recognized this is something different. This is something unique here. And so Acres is really proud to be stewards of those land moving forward. So it's not just enjoyed by one or two people who happen to own it now, but that Acres will make it available and make it sure it endures.
So we've talked about there's no entry fee, there's no gate fee or anything like that, but it's not cheap to manage these properties. And so you've got an endowment that you said could suffice to be able to pay for the waterway taxes and things like that. But that doesn't mean that you're just stopping what you're doing. You're all continually to acquire properties. So if people want to give, they want to get involved, how can they do that?
Yeah, that endowment would only cover one employee, and we have 12. And so, under that scenario, there wouldn't be any properties open to the public and things like that. And so, we're a nonprofit, and we don't know where next year's income is coming from. We have to raise it each year. It's not big federal grants. It's not big state grants. It's individuals and community foundations and people who just see value in many things. It's not just people who are interested in the particular natural things. It's sense of place. It's recreation. It's spiritual. There's lots of reasons that people like to preserve land. And so we're supported by people who say, that's a good idea that I'm connected to in some way. And Acres allows people to exercise a core value that you can't on your own. I could never own 8,000 acres worth of land, but I can help Acres do that. And I can go enjoy those properties and enjoy knowing that I helped do that. And for me, I want places for another 5-year-old boy to be inspired and say, I want to spend my life caring for this stuff, whether it's trees or the salamander that he gets excited about. And so there's so many different reasons why people support Acres, but that's the only way we exist. And so this year we acquired $7 million worth of land. That's not cheap, and land prices aren't getting any cheaper. And so it's an expensive business that we're in, and it's really an unusual thing to do. If you're going to go out and buy 100 acres of land, you want to own that land and use it the way you want to. But people who support Acres say, I want this organization to own this land. That way it'll always be available, not just to me, it'll always provide benefit. And so Acres allows that custody of care to last longer than your own lifetime or the lifetime of your children or your great-grandchildren. And so I think that's the unique thing that Acres does. And Acres has done a good job over the past 65 years of really finding those unique places. And so people get it. Like, oh, okay, I value nature for my reason, and I see that Acres is doing that. And so luckily we've had this chain of support for 65 years, and we hope it continues forever, of people seeing the relevance of what we do.
When we look at properties that are donated or agreed upon at a discounted price, like you were talking about earlier, that's not always for estates to figure that out after somebody has decided they're going to move off the land. In doing some research, I think I found a couple properties where you're actually granted kind of rights until the end of their life. Is that right?
Yeah. And so again, most of the properties that we acquire, we've had decades worth of relationships. And so the person says, I really want Acres to own this. I want to make sure that this happens. And what I tell those people is, if you are confident that this is the decision you want to make, they can donate it during their lifetime, and then they keep what's called a life estate. And so Acres owns the deed to the property, but they have full rights to use it as they've been using it until they pass away. And so a lot of people take advantage of that. They're like, I just want to know that it's locked in, but I still want to enjoy this property too. And so that's a tool that we use sometimes.
And that sounds like a great tool. I really appreciate you talking about Acres and all the opportunities there are out there. And again, I'm going to share on the show notes, the website. I want to talk a little bit about Jason. And
Yeah.
you've already mentioned that, as a 5-year-old, these trees, and you just fell in love. How did you obviously had that passion, but then how did you pursue that? What if we've got a listener that's 10 or 15 years old and they love insects or nature in general or trees? What's the best way to pursue that?
Yeah. As a younger child, it's just getting all the exposure you can to it. So learning about it, being around it. I would climb trees, be around them, learn their names, learned about them, starting to pay attention to why is that tree growing in that particular location? Why is it growing in that way? Why is its branch structure the way it is? And so you start to read the body language of whatever it is that you're studying. And then really talking to people in that field, really doing some job shadowing. You can take forestry lessons through 4-H or entomology. And so anything in the natural world, finding ways to engage in that. But the best thing is just to truly engage with it, to really get to know it. And so that was my path. My dad actually worked for the U.S. Forest Service, and so I came about it kind of naturally. And then we moved to Indiana and grew up near the Hoosier National Forest. So our backyard had about 4,000 acres of the Hoosier National Forest. And so that's where I spent my time. And so then I pursued a degree in forestry and then just have really worked with managing land since then. So again, if it's something that you have passion with, you can find ways to learn more and then just find ways to turn it into a career too.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like our listeners to know when they're listening to this podcast?
Really just that Acres is you. It's not an organization that determines what to do. It's an organization that listens to the communities. And Wabash is a great example of that. Kokowani, we already talked about, the community said, we want to keep access to this. Who could do that? Well, Acres could. Same thing with Asherwood. Marion Community Schools ran that as an educational center for years. Their funding went away, but they wanted to be able to retain the property. And so who could fill that role? Acres could do that. Hanging Rock has always been a roadside attraction, and the Swan family decided they would let Acres be the caretaker for that. And so instead of parking on the edge of the road, if you remember, we said, okay, let's make this more accessible for even bus tours that come in. And so we bought the property next door so we could add some parking and things like that. And so Acres survives because people like you who like nature says, that's a really cool thing, and I want to help them do that. And you can help financially, you can help by volunteering, you can help just by telling people. That's not your state tax dollars at work. That's Acres. That's people willingly throwing in their hard-earned money to buy land that you can go walk. That's a really unusual thing for people to do. It's a very unselfish thing for people to do. And luckily, Hoosiers have been doing that for 65 years and making these incredible places still staying incredible and accessible.
I want to challenge our listeners to go out and explore an Acres property if they haven't, or find a new Acres property. They're all over Wabash County, Huntington County, Miami County, within a close distance, or if you want to take a road trip and drive over to Ohio or Southern Michigan, you can find properties there as well. So I challenge you as a listener to go out and find that. You did mention a few times that some of the properties that are closed, you do open up and you'll do a tour, a learning lesson maybe. How can they find out more information about those opportunities?
Yeah, the best place is our website, acreslandtrust.org. And we have all kinds of events there that occur all throughout the service area. Yeah, there's always something going on, and it's just such a unique and fun group of people. What I love about what I do is it's a nonprofit, and it's people who love land and people who basically have gotten over themselves. They're like, you know what? I want to look at investing in something that's larger than me. And so Acres can fill that role for a lot of people. And so the people who are involved with volunteering and at the events, it's just such a nice group of people who are drawn to nature for very different reasons. But there's this instant bond saying, this is important and we're going to be part of that, whether it's volunteering my time or my voice, just to let people know that this exists, or I've got some money I can throw in too.
Yeah. Are there any upcoming projects or land acquisitions that you're really excited about? I know you did mention you would be closing on a couple here before the end of the year.
Yeah, there's some larger projects that we have going on in Ohio, one in Elkhart County. We have a few prospects here in Wabash County, but there still may be another few years out. But yes, there's always all these projects that are on the burner. And so, again, we got 2 more that we're going to close on this year and a couple more lined up for spring. But they'll be the ones that pop up at auction, or the ones where, again, we've spent 40 years building this relationship. And finally, the father calls and says, it's time for me to part with this property, and you're who I want. And so it's always exciting that there's new acquisitions always occurring. And then the 8,500 acres of land that we already have, each one is enough to sustain an organization. I mean, it's so exciting what happens on each property every single year. So yeah, there's always something going on. As we mentioned earlier, each season is great because the properties change, and winter's actually my favorite time to hike because you can really see the topography and you just get a better feel for the land underneath all the vegetation.
Well, and in the winter months, if there's a coating of snow on the ground, you can see, if you're the first person out there, which is my favorite time to go, you can see the rabbit tracks or the squirrel tracks, or, you just realize that there's like interstate highways out there of animal activity.
It really is. And that does really ring true in the wintertime because you see all the commutes. You see, okay, this is a busy intersection here. And then, it's just amazing because in the summer you don't see that because the wildlife scatters when they see this big predator walking down the trail. But you at least see in the wintertime the results of where they are and who was chasing who and who went first and who went second and what's the easiest way to get through this property for a deer if you are.
And just like us in the hot summer months, some of those animals just aren't active.
Yep.
In the winter, you may have some hibernation going on, but a lot of them are very active in the winter.
For sure.
I wanted to touch on the membership opportunities that you do have with your organization. If somebody wanted to give on a regular basis, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, again, they can go to our website and you can donate through there and set up a reoccurring gift. We have a membership, which means that you get some of our publications and we have some members-only events, and that's only $20 or more of a donation each year. That's pretty cheap. We try to keep it accessible to everybody. Luckily, we have people who can give $20,000, but a lot of us can't. Mm-hmm. And so if somebody can give $20, they become part of this thing, get more engaged, and then have a connection to the organization.
Well, and that $20, I mean, that really does mean something. The original founders of Acres gave $5 a piece.
Yep.
We can give $20, and I'm assuming that's a tax-deductible donation.
It is, yep.
And then you get these, like you said, you get the newsletters or publications, invites to special events. If you can do it, that seems like a fairly inexpensive investment into something that's going to last a long time.
It is. And it really helps us to have more members because we can show that we're relevant in that community. We can say there's this many members in this county who support Acres. And so that $20 has value in itself as $20, but it also has a lot of value just to show that this is important to me.
Yeah. Well, Jason, I want to thank you for coming onto the podcast, sharing the Acres story, which I think a lot of people are going to they're going to recognize the name. They've been to Hathaway or Kokawani, but they just don't know that backstory. And what you're really doing is preserving for forever, which is a very long time. Jason, thanks again for coming onto the podcast. Just like the donors that give to Acres Land Trust, this podcast would not be possible without special donors like Lisa Gilman Investment Fund, the Sandra Kunkel Trust, Mark and Amy Ford, Paperworks Industries, the City of Wabash, the Community Foundation of Wabash County, and Visit Wabash County. Until next time, I'm Adam Stakeman, and this is ThriveIN Wabash County.